The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. Book 5, The High King. Chapter 6, A Clutch of Eggs.
Amazing! Cried King Rune. Smoke made of egg? Or is it egg made of smoke? The smoke is inside, Gweistel muttered, drawing his shabby cloak about him. Goodbye. Crack the shell and the smoke comes out in considerable quantity. Keep them, a gift. If you should ever see Lord Whitey and warn him to shun a newborn at all cost. For myself, I'm glad to leave the place behind me and hope never to return. Goodbye.
Gweistel,
Eilonwy said sharply, gripping the melancholy creature's arm.
Something tells me there's more to that cloak of yours than meets the eye. What else have you hidden away? The truth now, or I promise you such squeezing?
Nothing, Gweistel choked. Despite the chill wind, he had begun perspiring heavily. His cobwebby hair hung limp, and his brow dipped as if he had been caught in a downpour. Nothing, that is, but a few little personal things of my own. But odds and ends, but if they interest you, by all means, you know. Gweistel raised his arms and spread his cloak on either side, a gesture which made him resemble a long-nosed and dismal bat. He sighed and groaned miserably while the companions stared in surprise.
Odd indeed, said Fluider, and great villain! There's no end of them.
Neatly attached within the folds of the cloak hung a dozen cloth sacks, mesh bags, and carefully wrapped packets. Most of them seemed to contain clutches of eggs of the sort Fluider had narrowly avoided eating. Gweistel pulled off one of the mesh bags and handed it to Eilonwy.
They say, exclaimed Rune, first eggs and now mushrooms.
As far as the princess could see, the mesh bag held nothing more than a few large, brown, speckled toadstools. But Gweistel waved his arms desperately and moaned, Beware, beware! Break them and they'll singe your hair off. They make a handsome puff of flame if you should ever need such a thing. But take them, I'm well pleased to be rid of them.
It is what we need, Eilonwy cried. Gweistel, forgive me for threatening to squeeze you.
She turned to the bard, who was examining the sacks with an air of uneasiness.
Yes, these will help us. Now, if we can find a way into the castle.
My dear princess, replied Fluider, a flam is dauntless, but I hardly think it practical, overcoming a stronghold with little more than eggs and mushrooms in our hands. Even eggs and mushrooms of this particular sort. And yet...
He hesitated, then snapped his fingers.
Great villain! We might pull it off at that. Wait, I'm beginning to see the possibilities.
Gweistel, meantime, had unfastened the remaining packets from his voluminous cloak. Here, he sighed. Since you have most of them, you might as well have the rest. But all of it, go on, it makes no difference to me now. The packets, which Gweistel held out in a trembling hand, were filled with a quantity of what appeared to be dark, powdery earth. Put this on your feet and no one can see your tracks. But that is, if someone's looking for your tracks. But that's really what it's for. But if you throw it into someone's eyes, they can't see anything at all. But for a short while, at least.
Better and better, cried Fluider. We'll have our friends out of the spider's clutches in no time. A daring deed, clouds of smoke, billows of fire, blinding powder, and a flam to the rescue. That will give the bard something to sing about. Tell me, old fellow, he added uneasily to Gweistel. You're quite sure those mushrooms work?
The companions hurriedly returned to the cover of the thicket to set their plans. Gweistel, after much coaching and cajoling, as well as hints of future squeezings and suggestions of King Eileg's displeasure, at last agreed, with many a racking sigh and moan, to help in the rescue. The bard was eager to begin immediately.
In my long experience,
Fluider said,
I found it best to go at this kind of business head on. First, I shall return to the castle. Since the warriors know me, they'll open the gates without a second thought. Under my cloak, I'll have Gweistel's eggs and mushrooms. Directly the gates are open, clouds of smoke, a blast of fire. The rest of you will be lurking behind me in the shadows. At my signal, we all rush in, swords drawn, shouting at the top of our voices.
Amazing, put in Rune. It can't fail.
The King of Mona frowned.
On the other hand, it would almost seem, not that I know anything about these matters, we'd be rushing into our own smoke and fire. I mean to say the warriors couldn't see us, but neither could we see them.
Florida shook his head in disagreement.
Believe me, my friend, this is the best and quickest way. I've rescued more captives than I have fingers on my hands.
The harp tensed and shuddered, and a number of strings would have given away had not Fluider added in the same breath.
Planned to rescue, that is. I've never, in strict point of fact, actually done so.
Rune is right, Eilonwe declared. It would be worse than stumbling over our own feet. Besides, we'd be risking everything at one go. No, we must have a better plan than that.
King Rune beamed, surprised and delighted that his words had found agreement. He blinked his pale blue eyes, grinned shyly, and ventured to raise his voice once more.
I suddenly think of the seawall I've been rebuilding,
he began in some hesitation.
I mean, starting from it at both ends. Then, fortunately, it didn't quite turn out as I had hoped, but the idea was a good one. Now, if we might try the same kind of thing, not building a wall, of course, I mean going at Kirkadarn from different ways.
Fluider shrugged, not a little crestfallen that his own suggestion had been dismissed. But Eilonwe nodded.
Yes, it's the only sensible thing.
Glue snorted.
The only sensible thing is to get an army behind you. When I was a giant, I'd have been willing to help you, but I mean to have no part in this scheme.
The little man was about to say more, but a glance from the bard silenced him.
Never fear,
said Fluider.
You and I will be together at every moment. You'll be in good hands.
Now then,
broke in Rune, impatient to speak again.
There are 5 of us. Should someone climb over the rear wall, the others enter at the gate.
The young king rose to his feet, and his eyes flashed eagerly.
Fluider Flame shall have the gates open. Then, while the others attack from the far wall, I shall ride straight through the gates.
Rune's hand had gone to his sword. His head was thrown back, and he stood before the companions as proudly as if all the kings of Mona were at his side. He spoke on firmly and clearly, with such joyful enthusiasm that Eilonwe had no heart to stop him. But at last she interrupted.
Rune, I'm sorry,
Eilonwe said.
But, and I think Fluider will agree with me, you will serve better if you stay out of the actual fighting unless it's absolutely necessary. That way you'll be on hand when you're needed, but it won't be quite so dangerous for you.
Rune's face clouded with disappointment and dismay.
But they say you're not a prince anymore,
Eilonwe added before Rune could continue his protest.
You're king of Mona. You have a whole realm of people to think of. Your life isn't altogether your own, don't you see? And we shan't let you take any more risks than you have to. You'll be in far too much danger as it is. If Queen Teleria could have guessed the way things would turn out, Eilonwe added, you wouldn't have sailed to Caer Dallben in the first place. I don't see what my mother has to do with it, cried Rune. I'm sure my father would have wanted. Your father understood what it means to be a king, Eilonwe said gently. You must learn as well as he did. Tyrant of Caer Dallben saved my life on Mona, Rune said urgently. I am in his debt, and it is a debt that I alone can pay. You owe another kind of debt to the fisher folk of Mona, Eilonwe replied, and theirs is the greater claim. Rune turned away and sat dejectedly on a hummock, his sword trailing at his side. Fluider gave him an encouraging clap on the shoulder.
Don't despair,
said the bard.
If our friend Gweistel's eggs and mushrooms fail, you'll have more than your share of trouble. So will we all.
It was nearly dawn and bitter cold when the little band left the concealment of the thicket and moved stealthily toward the lightless castle. Each carried a share of Gweistel's mushrooms and eggs, and a packet of his black loamy powder. Making a wide circle, they now approached Kirkadarn from its darkest, most shadowed side.
Remember the plan?
Fluider warned under his breath.
It must go exactly as we said it. When we are all in position, Gweistel is to pop open one of those famous mushrooms of his. The fire should draw the guards to the rear of the courtyard. That will be your signal, he said to Eilonwe in Rune. Then, and not before, mind you, be ready to force the gates open as soon as possible, for I imagine we shall be rather in a hurry to get out. At the same time, I'll free Smite's men locked up in the guard room. They'll help you if you need them, while I make my way to the larder and loose our friends. We must hope that villainous spider hasn't already taken them away somewhere. If he has, well, we shall have to make a new plan on the spot. And you, old fellow,
Fluider added to Gweistel as the dark walls loomed ahead.
I think it's time for you to do as you promised.
Gweistel sighed heavily, and his mouth drooped more wretchedly than ever.
But I'm not up to climbing, not today. But if only you could have waited next week, perhaps. Or when the weather turns better. Well, no matter. There's little a person can do about it.
Still shaking his head dubiously, the gloomy creature set down the coils of rope he carried over his shoulder. The large fishhooks, taken from his bundle, he now added at various angles to the end of a slender line. Fascinated, King Rune watched as Gweistel, with a deft movement, flung the line into the air. From the parapet high above came a faint rasping sound, then a dry click as the hooks caught on a projecting stone. Gweistel tugged at the cord and slugged the remaining coils of ropes about his neck.
They say, Rune whispered, will that fishing line hold you?
Gweistel sighed and looked mournfully at him.
I doubt it.
Nevertheless, mumbling and moaning, he quickly hoisted himself into the air. Hanging an instant before his feet found the stones of the wall. Pulling himself up on the line and scrabbling with his feet against the sheer side of the castle, Gweistel was soon out of sight.
Amazing!
Cried Rune. The bard frantically cautioned him to silence. A moment later, the fishing line was hauled up, and the end of one of the heavier ropes came swinging down. The bard lifted Glue, who was protesting as loudly as he dared, and boosted him onto the dangling cord.
Up you go,
The Fluider muttered.
I'll be right behind you.
Rune followed, as the bard and the former king disappeared into the shadows. Eilonwy seized the rope and felt herself rapidly drawn aloft. She swung herself over the parapet and dropped to a projecting ledge. Gweistel had already scuttled toward the rear of the castle. Fluider and Glue slid into the darkness below. King Rune grinned at Eilonwy and crouched against the cold stones. The moon was down, the sky had turned black. Amid the shadows of the silent buildings, the stables, and the long dark mass which Eilonwy guessed to be Smite's great hall, the low flames of a watchfire gleamed. Farther along the parapet, in the direction of the gates, the figures of the guards stood motionless, drowsing.
Dare you say it's dark enough?
Rune whispered cheerfully.
We shan't need Gweistel's powder at this rate. They can hardly see as it is.
Eilonwy turned her eyes in the direction Gweistel had taken, waiting from one endless moment to the next for the signal. Rune was tensed, ready to fling himself down the rope. A shout rang from the courtyard. At the same instant, a cloud of crimson flame burst in the shadows of the great hall. Eilonwy jumped to her feet.
Something's amiss, she cried. Fluider attacks too soon.
It was only then that she saw a burst of fire at the far end of the castle. More shouts of alarm rose above the clatter of racing footsteps. But the warriors, Eilonwy saw with sinking heart, ran not to Gweistel's false attack, but to the great hall. The courtyard seethed with shadows. Torches sprang to light.
Quickly! Eilonwy shouted. The gates!
Rune swung from the ledge. Eilonwy was about to follow him when she glimpsed a bowman at one of the guard posts on the wall. He raced toward her, then halted to take aim. Hastily, Eilonwy drew a mushroom from her cloak and flung it at the warrior. It fell short and split against the stones. Fire spurted, blinding her. The flames leaped in a roaring, searing cloud. The bowman shouted in terror and staggered back. His arrow whistled past her head. The girl seized the rope and dropped into the courtyard below.